So as we continue becoming new Stoics, we go back to our handbook for new Stoics in week 12, the week of temptations. This is a good lesson because, although I have some questions about it we'll get to in a moment, I liked this phrase that to start out with, the intensity of the urge. So the temptations is about those, whether you want to call them behaviors or snacky desires, things that are unhealthy for you. Whatever those desires are, the more you have them around, the more likely you are to partake in them. So one of the examples they use in week 12, which you're following along, page 82, 83, 84, and so on, is a person who likes to maybe have a couple of beers, like me, like to have a couple of beers. But maybe you don't want to have a couple of beers. If you smell the beer, you are much more likely scientifically to drink the beers. Whereas if you avoid the beers, you are less likely to do so. So whether that's snacking, Oreos, I love Oreos. If I don't have them in the house, I won't eat them. But if I go to the store and they're on sale, I will buy them. So that's why Amy goes to the store, to not buy Oreos.
But not Oreos and beer together, right? Because
not a good idea. Maybe beer, Oreos, beer.
Maybe a stout beer
with
Oreos.
It is possible. It is possible.
Yeah.
Someone, I'm sure, has made an Oreo stout beer.
Oh, yes.
But the idea here being, obviously, to put the temptations out of sight. That is the title. I don't know if we can zoom in and see it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the easiest way to deal with temptation. So I'm curious if there's going to be a building block on this, because avoidance doesn't seem to be a great long-term solution to me. So I'm thinking that this might be step one in what could be a 2 or 3 step process to become mentally resilient enough to smell the beer and then be able to resist it.
Well, they do talk about that a little bit in here, where you're right. I don't even think they're necessarily saying avoidance, because specifically what they want you to do as part of the exercise is start to identify the pattern around the craving. And again, that craving or behavior, that desire could be something that is food. It could be something that is your phone, television, a person. You know, there's so many different things that can be a behavioral desire that you maybe want to try to reduce. And so they actually want you to specifically identify the trigger and how often the trigger happens as well, because you may eventually be able to better prevent the trigger or handle when the trigger occurs. So that way you're not running and hiding. You're not going to the party, right? To your examples here, you're not going to the birthday party because there might be cake there. Instead, you're learning to identify, why do I want that cake? What's the precursor to that? What's the feeling, the perceived feeling that I'm going to receive once I have it? And then setting that mantra or that implementation intention to say, I'm choosing not to because of X, Y, and Z.
Well, and they do say at the top of page 84, while putting them out of sight may be seen as a crutch, crutches are necessary for healing. So it's my guess that in this book, they're talking about when you're first trying to really become mindful of it, putting it out of sight as much as possible to help you kind of get over that hump, and then working on the implementation meditation about it so that in the future that you have something to do, a way to deal with it, right? Because, and they even talk about people who are social drinkers of alcohol. As I've worked a lot with people in recovery from alcohol and substances, and in the beginning, when it's really new, you don't want to be around it at all. You're usually separate from that because being around that temptation is too much. And then over time, after your resolve has strengthened, after you've got the tools in your toolbox, it's not as fresh, then you learn how to, unless you go live in a, monastery, well, even then they drink wine. So, you're essentially never going to eliminate your exposure to alcohol. So then it becomes that implementation and knowing what to do, how to talk to yourself, what to do in that situation to keep it true to your virtue.
Yeah, this is base level.
But starting at the get it out of your sight, so it's not even available to you now.
Right.
to eventually prepare for when you will be exposed to it in the future.
Well, then there's the Seneca quote that's on page 82, which I won't read the entire thing, but I liked the way he put it. The emotions soon return to the attack. And I thought that was such a clever way to write a quote about what your emotions can do to you. And his example, it's being reminded of an ex-lover, an ex-girlfriend, ex-boyfriend, whatever. That if you have reminders of that person, our day would be pictures on our phones probably, or stuff around the house. For them, it was probably just stuff around the house. That you see those emotions come flooding back to you. So that's the idea of, okay, if you do break up with someone, get rid of that stuff. Because the less you're reminded of that person, the more you'll be able to move on rather than just wallow in the sorrow.
Right. The triggers.
Yes.
What your triggers are.
So I'm curious from you ladies, what popped up for triggers that we want to admit on the Painted Porch Strategies conversation on the porch.
Yeah.
You go first.
Yeah, Sarah, go ahead.
Oh, okay, I'll go first. So, for me, I love sugary sweets. I love all of it. I love watching shows about, cookies and cakes and all that. I love it, but it that doesn't love me back. I am on a diet where I don't eat real sugar. I don't eat a lot of sugar. It gives me horrible migraines. So, and this has been my path for the last several years, but I still am triggered by it. Like, I would love to eat all the sweets. I really would. So my possible trigger this week was, we had a family dinner. We often, especially more during the pandemic, we did every Sunday. Now it's a little more sporadic, but family dinner, and they were celebrating my birthday. So there were several different types of sugary sweets for the group, and for everybody else, it's perfect. They love it. What I had to do I could not remove the trigger because that would not be fair to other people in my family who eat all the sugar they want. But I did obstruct the trigger. So what I did was I brought my own version. I made my own little Madeline cookies that I could eat, and I brought enough to share with everybody. And that way I had something, so I can't look at the amazing chocolate cake, the amazing tiramisu, the amazing, smorgasbord of sweets, and just sit there and suffer with my mouth watering. I had something that I could eat. I had something that I could share. And it worked really well, because had I not brought something, I would have been very tempted, and I may have given in and said, oh, I'll have a few bites. But I have learned that even a few bites can make me feel really terrible. So this was a win-win. Everybody got what they wanted, and I avoided the big temptation of the sugar.
I think that's you used one of the terms that they talk about here. They say, what can you do to remove or obstruct? And I think that's key, because again, sometimes removal just, if you're not living by yourself, or you're not living with someone that can go on the same food path as you, sometimes those things are still going to be around. So you have to find those obstructions, the ways to obstruct it, to heat it off at the pass, right? And be able to have an alternative, so that way you don't feel as though it's deprivation, because when you feel it's deprivation, you only want it more.
Yes.
But being able to identify, okay, what can you do to remove it, or how can you really obstruct it? And then by removing it or obstructing it, what is the benefit? What are you gaining from doing that? So I think that's key, because, so often we think about diets. Oh, I'm on a diet. I can't eat blah, 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 as opposed to saying I get to eat these things. Or, nowadays for the internet, thank goodness, you can find a keto, paleo, gluten-free, vegan version of pretty much anything that you want. So, so you can create your own obstructions to help you along the way if you're trying to, in this example, eat healthier. Now, we're talking a lot about food, but, obviously there are other behaviors as well that can exist. And so one of mine that I talked about was, and I've mentioned this before, Amazon shopping. So easy. It's so easy to just go online. And then, I go on for one thing, and then 3 hours later, I've bought way too many things.
She had a run where we had, I think it was of at least 2 weeks. There was at least one package every day, sometimes 3 packages from Amazon. No, it wasn't. It was like 2 months ago. We're filming this in the end of July 2020.
I'm just saying, it felt like Christmas.
Oh, it felt like Christmas, but that's it.
Or
right?
Hanukkah. It felt like Hanukkah.
That's, and you probably forget what you get.
Yeah.
So you open the box, like, woo, it's a surprise. So it probably feels stimulating when you open the box, especially if you've ordered so much, like, which one is this?
Although in my defense, I am going to defend myself here for those, because that was when I was remodeling the office, and it was a lot of trial and error. So I'm like, I'm going to order 3 different things and see which one actually works and test them out. And then, things for the office, desk, keyboards, whatever, all that stuff.
So what are you going to do to block this?
Temptation.
Obstruct.
So, well, first off, it asks, what's the trigger? And the triggers primarily were sometimes boredom. I go on just to kind of peruse and see, is there anything fun that catches my eye? But also I do have legitimate purchase needs. And some of the things, that's one thing with Amazon, is that there are some things that it's just beyond the fact that it gets delivered to your house. It's just some of the things can become a bit of a mission to find, and you're like, where's the best place out in the world for me to find this, versus just going on Amazon and buying it. So those were my 2 triggers. I identified 2 triggers, and I basically said that really for me, the way I'm going to obstruct it, because I can't entirely remove it because there's still legitimate shopping needs that go into that, but create a separate shopping list, and then once a week, or once, I'll stick with once a week for now. Once a week, go on, add everything and buy it. And then, so that way I'm not mindlessly scrolling and looking for more things to buy.
I do the cart and then save for later. Especially if it's something that I don't need, but I like, I save for later, and then I can kind of like come back to it and think about it. So I think that's a wise obstruction.
Yes. Yeah, I do that as well for things that I'm like, oh, that's cool. Because, adding it to a wish list it's a little tough to get to those wish lists. I usually put it all in the save till later. Yeah.
But it shows you how Amazon has impacted so many of our lives in one way or another because of the ease. And again, going back to the convenience world that we live in, that is one of them, where now you don't have to go to a store, which is going to take you minimum 30 minutes. Even if you go to the grocery store down the street, you got to drive there, you got to park, you got to find stuff, you got to check out, you got to drive home. Whereas I can just do this right now on my phone. It takes me 5 minutes. It will be at my door tomorrow or 2 days from now. Easy as pie.
Sometimes same day.
Yeah. Well, that's it, right? I mean, and that's the challenge.
No masking required either.
No.
That's another factor. No have to worry about being in the store in this current situation that we're living in. So that becomes in a way more stoically challenging to do, because these things are so convenient and so easy to do. It's so easy to fall into the trap of repeating. That's where you have to take Sierra's course on mindfulness and become more mindful of all of these things.
Yes. And to practice the more and more, like we talked about last week, the Stoic virtue of temperance and moderation.
Right, exactly. That's why they build these together.
I think too, recognizing the triggers. I mean, you hit the nail right on the head when you said boredom, because that's true, but let's also not ignore the fact that with everything that's happening right now with the pandemic, you guys are in Arizona, I'm in Florida, we're in 2 of like the worst places in the country as it stands right now for this, and all the drama that's happening, so much of our lives feel really out of control. And humans, when we feel out of control, we grip onto things that are within our control. We grip harder to those things. So we tend to want to hold really tight to the things that we can. And one of the things that you can control is getting stuff. And Amazon makes it really easy to get the stuff.
Yep.
So when you recognize what the triggers are, and then still try to bring that rational thought into it, like I order a lot of really basic thing. Like I order like our vitamins and stuff
Right.
online. And I have shopped it, and it is cheaper. Like there's actual rational reasons for doing it that way versus going to a store. Plus, I try to limit how much I'm out of stores. So when you can kind of back out and take the boredom piece out of it and take the, am I gripping to retail therapy or is this an actual need? Then you can kind of look at it and then make a stoic decision.
Right. That emotional escapism. Yeah. That we can all
Right.
fall into very often.
Which ties into mine, which they use as an example too, and it's social media. Because I found that was a boredom killer for me, that anytime I had a moment, I was addicted to that, picking up the phone, finding Facebook, finding Twitter, Instagram. So I took Facebook and Twitter off my phone. So if I really want to be on Facebook, I really have to go find my computer, log on, and scroll through. So I found that I scroll through a whole lot less.
But you did keep Instagram.
I did keep Instagram, but here's why. Typically, I get bored of Instagram after about 7 minutes.
Okay.
So I'll be on Instagram for 7 minutes, and I like looking at pictures more than reading comments about masks, no mask, COVID this, politics this. So it's harder to do that because the picture has to come up first. And I found that the way my Instagram feed works, there's a lot more positive messages based on who I follow. And I get to see cool pictures of Sierra, Chris, and Colt while they're on vacation. And that always makes me smile, especially with Colt's energy. It just comes out of the screen. So that being said, that's where I'm at as far as that goes, which was funny because I did this like 2 weeks before that lesson, and it's helped reduce those cravings. If I looked at my screen time on my iPhone, I'm guaranteed it's down from where it was 3, 4, or 5 weeks ago.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, one thing I thought was really interesting that they talked about on page 83, kind of in the middle, is that they were talking about how cognitive science, and specifically they mentioned this woman, Helen Fisher, who is an expert on the biology of love, how they found that there's neural correlation of romantic feelings similar to cravings and even addictions. So basically, unhealthy cravings of any kind neurologically are happening in the same place as when you fall in love. I thought that was so fascinating that they talked about that, and they even cited like specific addictions, but the part of the brain that lights up when there's some sort of romantic interaction, good or bad, is the same that happens when it comes to cravings and feelings of winning or losing.
Makes sense though, doesn't it?
It was very interesting that, because even Seneca talks about, you mentioned falling in love. So they said, it's a very similar premise.
Well, and it makes sense when you think about the primitive hardwiring of humans. One of we're primitively wired. There's kind of two main purposes. One is to survive, and one is to procreate. So if your body is hardwired, or however you imagine that your body is created, I'm not going to get existential here, but your body is hardwired to survive and to promote the species. And how do you promote the species? By falling in love, or at least falling in love enough for a physical act to produce a child to continue the species. So if you think of that, how much more powerful our stress reactions for fight or flight, super powerful, and our reactions to falling in love, procreating the species, these are like the oldest things. Same in Greek times, same as caveman times. Like these are strong things.
Designed to be.
Yeah.
It's
Designed that
becoming
way.
aware of them, is that's when you can go back to the dichotomy of control, when you can start to take control of them and say no to the Oreos, or no to social media, or no to Amazon, whatever the case may be, or at least pause on it and say, do I really need this right now?
Right.
Yeah,
they talk about on page 86, kind of at the wrap up of why to do it, but they talk about, it's intended to help you recognize your limitations by using your environment to your advantage, and basically making certain unwanted behaviors harder. And that's where I think you can avoid, which is really what we're focusing on first here, avoidance, but creating obstacles, right? Making it harder for you to do the thing that you think you want to do that's really not that great for you in the long run.
Right.
Yes.
So, monitoring what your precursors are, what's leading up to it. So that way you'll be more aware of your triggers. So that way you can address the trigger, not the behavior, not the resulting action. You can be,
Yeah.
why am I doing this?
It's essentially setting yourself up for success, or controlling all of the factors that are within your control.
Yeah.
It's that premeditation of plan. What's the Greek word, Amy?
Premeditatio malorum.
All of the things of, and that's why we talk about in our courses being really clear about what do you want to move towards and what do you want to move away from. So make it harder to move towards the things that you want to move away from, and make it a lot easier to move towards the things that you want, towards the virtues, away from the vices.
Right.
And even to dig into a little bit to where we go with some of our courses as well, is that internal talk that you have that sometimes gears you towards negative talk or talks you out of doing something you really want to do, that will promote growth. That sometimes you get stuck because your brain also wants you to be comfortable. It likes comfort. It doesn't like the unknown, because unknown is risky, and your brain's like, whoa, wait a second. So that is also part of this, which is why we do what we do, is to try to promote everyone to, know the risks that most likely you're going to take are not really that risky. Unless you're thinking about jumping out of a plane without a parachute, risky. Right. But growing as a human being and learning new things, or going for a promotion or trying a different career, that all can be uncomfortable, but it won't be for long, because it's not that risky.
Right.
Yeah. And to your point, having the right self-talk of like, you know what, this is going to likely be uncomfortable, and I'm likely going to fall down several times, but I've been through worse. I've got a plan of action. I've got a mantra. I've got my script, ready to go to continue anyway. So it's I think this is, again, it's preparing us for all of these steps. It's like all these little baby steps moving towards that.
Well, and it goes back to, I think, a couple lessons ago where we talked about labels and good or bad, and what is good or bad. And really, the only things that are good are the things that are virtuous, that are aligned with your values. And everything else, they even talk about in this lesson, everything else should really be either bad, a true vice, to use your word, Sierra, or an indifferent. And they talk, in our lesson last week with food, it's an indifferent. It is what it is. It's sustenance for your body. So we can look at that literally from a food perspective, which is what we've talked about a lot today and even last week. But whatever the desire is, ideally just moving towards it being an indifferent. So it's neither good nor bad. It's just is. And focusing on the things that are good, because those are the things that you can actually control, and helps you elevate you in your pursuit of the good life.
The virtuous life.
The virtuous life.
Virtuous life.
Eudaimonia.
The flow.
Yes.
Yep.
So I'd encourage you guys to do the same thing. If you have vices that you're thinking about and you're watching this and you're wanting to say, oh, wait a second here, reach out to us and let us know what they are, whether it's social media, going out to eat, Amazon, whether it's Oreos, Skittles, whatever the case may be. We'd love to know what they are and
all
how,
of the above.
well, yes, but how you're processing that, and how you're trying to, in this time where we filmed this, in the time of COVID-19, how do you deal with them? I found some of them easier because we're locked up. So because I try to limit going out as well, it's a lot easier to not have Oreos in the house, or it's a lot easier to not go out to eat. So instead, the change of whatever is invite people over to the house. So it's smaller groups, you're cooking, the food's going to be better anyways. You can control the portions a little bit easier.
Yeah.
So there is some gratitude to find in these times.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think to add to, Rob, to what you're saying, definitely share with us whatever vices or desires, we should say. We're not going to label them as bad. There just are. Whatever desires you might be wanting to reduce, and what type of methods you're going to use to either eliminate or obstruct. But also, if you'd like to join us, we'd love to have you join us in our study over the next 52 weeks here on our journey to become new Stoics. And you can sign up at the link that's in this video. We'd love for you to join us, join our private Facebook group, and join us in the conversation, because, you know, together we can all help each other become better. And through having different perspectives, both with this group as well as the larger group as well, we can really start to gain some great tools in our toolbox to help us really harness the dichotomy of control and understanding what we can and can't control, and how we can live a good, virtuous life.
So next week,
Yeah.
we'll do it again. Week 13.
Do it again next week.
Practicing minimalism.
Oh.
That'll be a challenge, especially with all the Amazon talk.
Oh man, that's gonna be tough. All right, well, you know what? We got to start somewhere, guys. And
We do.
The only way to get started is to get started and look at it. So that's what we're gonna do next week.
Mm-hmm. All right. So until next week, be great, be virtuous, and always focus on what it is that you can control and